Bowling Green to see if there were some more people there. When they left, the husband of one of the Taylor daughters, McCord, went with them. Several of the Allreds went. There's an indication, although not in the official record, but in some of the family histories, that John went with them. They went on into independence, and as you know, they did not end up fighting. There was a horrible storm, and there was a cholera epidemic. And William and Elizabeth's son-in-law died of cholera. There are stories that have been put onto Facebook, onto Family Search, that indicates when all that happened, we were living in Ray County on Fishing River. And none of that appears to be true. The move happened later. And we never did live on Fishing River. We lived in Fishing River Township. Everybody know what a township is? When the country devised a way to account for land descriptions, they adopted a township system. A township is 36 sections, 6 wide and 6 deep. And once you get your 36 sections, you move on. The townships are identified as usually a north and an east or west measurement from a particular location. So one of the things that's interesting that I tried to put in here, there's a gentleman by the name of C. Keith Allred, who has gone into the records of Missouri and has extracted the information about the land owned by the Taylors, the Allreds, and the Allreds' close family, the Ivies and the Andersons. And they've identified the legal descriptions from the transactions, and he's created maps that show where the land is. So you can go through. So his book is on Family Search under books, and you can actually look at it. It's free of charge, and it shows exactly where the land was. And so I've provided for you maps of these basic moves of William across Missouri. When they got to Monroe County, they bought some land by what's a major road today, right in the middle of the Allreds. And then a year later, they sold that and bought some land just a little to the south. And then they sold that and moved to Ray County in the middle of the Allreds. And they were forced out of there quickly. And they moved to Lenox County, and they bought land in the middle of the Allreds. So for this period, they made friends with the Allreds, and they intermarried with them. The oldest kids in both families married. And as they were going across Missouri in these various iterations, they were living in the same community. And I've given you the maps that show you that. And if you're really ambitious, you could go into Family Search in books and look up C. Keith Allred, Missouri Lands of the Allreds, and you can find it, and it's free to use. So I've identified each one of those and briefly discussed. You get to a kind of to me, the saddest part of the story. They bought land in Caldwell County, which the Missourians had promised to leave us alone if we went there. And it wasn't very long until they were trying to drive us out of there. There's a lot of historical research been done and written about this period. And some of it makes me angry. But the short answer is we started building a temple in that county. And we were attacked. Some people would make the argument that we provoked the attack. We were attacked. People were killed. A lot of people moved into far west for a variety of reasons and stayed there for a while during this troublesome time. So our tailors were there when this was all happening. The leaders of the LDS church were arrested, put in jail, and as the people went back out to their farms, they found that the people attacking them had been camping out, using their resources. So when our family went back to their farmland in Caldwell County, infrastructure was destroyed, crops were ruined, and their stocks had been destroyed. They decided to stay. William and Elizabeth were older, and since we know that William died a few months later, I suspect William's health was not great, but they stayed. Part of why they stayed is that they felt an obligation to try to provide some help to the church leaders who were in prison. In those days, the county didn't provide 3 square meals a day and bedding if you were in prison. So if you were in prison, you had to rely largely on what your friends and family would do to take care of you. And that's what Elizabeth Taylor did. In the spring, when things broke up and the church leaders were able to get away from the forces in Missouri, and the church was gathering in Illinois, our Taylors left Missouri and made their way to Illinois. Some of the people had been there for 6 or 8 months, maybe even a year. We were some of the last ones to get there. And as we got close to Nauvoo, William died. And that's kind of the end of the story for William.
When we visited that area a few years ago, there was a street marker.
Yeah, so one of our cousins, Ken Crosley, was living back there, and he spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly where William was buried. So this is the fall of 1839. The town of Nauvoo's starting to be developed. We're almost there. We're within a dozen miles, and William's life gives out. So one of our cousins in Idaho, in Rigby, Idaho, has commissioned a painting showing this. It's a very nice painting, and we've shared a copy of it in the Taylor Times.
And I'll also show it tomorrow too.
Yeah, so you'll see a copy of it tomorrow. But he died, was buried. There was somebody named Williams that owned land adjacent to where they were. And there was an old pioneer graveyard there. Evidence of it has largely dissipated, but it's been identified. I think Ken has convincingly shown us where it is. And I've given you an old map version. Colonel Williams is the man, and the old cemetery is near that, near this intersection right here. Ken's document is in the memories section of Family Search for William Taylor. So if you're not familiar with this and are curious where it is and would like to know more, Ken's document is in the memories section of Family Search for William. It's available to see. Okay.
There's a large gravestone in Nauvoo with William Taylor. And many of the Taylors came and think that's where he was died and buried, but that's not the case. But it is a wonderful gravestone, but it's not where he was. the property he was buried on was one of the leading anti-Mormons. And they, when it come time to attack the Mormons, he threatened to dig up this Mormon that was on his field. And the older boys had to go and, with their guns, protect the grave. But it was there coming about 16, 17 miles from Nauvoo is where he's buried. And it was a non-Mormon 2,000-acre property that was one of the anti-Mormon leaders.
Yeah, this is several miles south of Nauvoo.
In Ken's report, it gives exact details based on sources of where it's at and how he found it.
So they went on into Nauvoo. So Elizabeth at this point was a widow. The kids grew up, and like almost everybody else in Nauvoo, they eventually headed west. Not exactly of their own free choice, but it seemed like there was a plan. One thing that always struck me, so we lived in Illinois for 20 years, and I spent a lot of time going over to Nauvoo, sometimes to see Kay, sometimes to see the sites, to be involved in activities going on. We watched the temple be rebuilt. But one thing would always get me. You walk down the streets, turn the corner, and head toward the river. Someone has built a monument. Identifying the children who died fleeing away from Nauvoo. And I bawl every time I see it. I thought I could talk about it without becoming emotional, but I have a hard time. So I gave you a list of the kids and where they lived largely after Nauvoo. And some of them, particularly Louisa Taylor Stout, I mentioned the ones that died. She lost more babies trying to get from Nauvoo to the west than she had children reach majority. One of the prominent families in St. George is the Cox family. And many of them are descendants of Louisa's son Elizabeth, who married one of the early Coxes. I didn't know that when I moved here, but I started seeing reference to the family of some of the Coxes who would show up in political stories or in obituaries. And I realized, oh, they're my cousins. So I've given you the names of the children and what happened to them. The second slide with their names, I've identified the ones that had a significant impact in southern Utah, which I guess is the theme for what we're doing here. Roy Johnson is a descendant of Nancy Taylor Smith Johnson's daughter, Permelia. And the community down in Hilldale is full of our cousins. A lot of the Stouts that you see around are our cousins. And a lot of the families up at New Harmony are descendants of either William Warren or Allen. because both of them left a lot of descendants in this part of the country. So, I'm taking you on a trip from Tidewater, Virginia. I've told you some of the problems, some of the issues, and I've tried to hit the highlights of what happened along the way. When I was a kid, we went to, it's kind of maybe the first, almost like an IMAX, Cinerama theater in Salt Lake City, and saw how the West was won. I was in my early teens, and I thought, what a cool story. And the older I got, the more I realized that was our story. We didn't go on exactly the same pathway they did, but that's our story. We hit most of the important